All right, welcome everyone who is attending today, our overview for our new members. We have institutions who are scheduled to attend today: Dickinson College, Union College, Tulane University, University of Oregon, Macalester College, Virginia Commonwealth, University of New Mexico, DePaul University, Southern Methodist University, and University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We have had several members join just in the last 6 months. So we are happy to give you an orientation to HathiTrust. Welcome to all of you, and talk to you about how you can get the most of your membership. So today we're going to mute everybody, should be muted, and your videos turned off. There is a chat window you will see on your right-hand side of your screen. Please use the chat window if you have any questions, and when there is time for questions, I'll be reading from the chat window to our presenters, and they will answer. That allows the questions and the answers to be captured in the recording for later viewing. Okay, so I think we're ready to turn it over to Mike Furlow, Executive Director. He is going to get started today.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. I want to say thanks to Melissa Stewart for arranging this. Many of you have talked to Melissa over the duration of the period that you were becoming members, and she has done outstanding work in organizing this and other activities. I want to give you a quick outline of the discussion today, and then we will dive right in. The plan today is to give you enough of a sense of history and grounding in what we do to understand more how you can more effectively work within HathiTrust, take the greatest advantage of HathiTrust. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of organizational background, telling you how HathiTrust got started and how we operate today. Angelina Zaitsev will follow me, and she'll talk about both our collections and our services and what members can do as members. I'll come back in and talk about a few cooperative strategic initiatives we have, and then following that, Sandra McIntyre will join us to conclude with forthcoming work. After each of these sections, Melissa is going to come back on and read questions from chat. I hope you all understand we're not trying to not hear from you. It's just that we often have a really terrible time with echo and feedback if we don't try to control audio during this. So you'll be able to ask your questions at any time during each section. Type them in, and Melissa will read them off, and we'll answer. Now, as Melissa suggested, the most important question that I hope we can answer today is how you can get the most out of HathiTrust. So let me start by jumping into the organization, and I always like to start by talking a little bit about our mission. I think it's a lot of folks think of HathiTrust as a digital library, as a site to go to find kind of amazing collections, and that's true. But I think first and foremost, we have these collections because it's our goal to collect scholarship, the record of human knowledge, organize it, preserve it, communicate it to the future. In many respects, then it's essentially a library mission, right? It's what you all do in your organization as well. And there are a lot of different ways we accomplish this. I've just listed a few different activities that we have underway as a way of fulfilling that mission. But I can go into some more detail and just kind of emphasize a few things for you. As I said, a lot of folks think of us as a digital library, and I do think that that is true. And at base, we are a digital preservation service. That's the core of what we do. It's the core of how we got started. But we are much more than that. Because we have aggregated so much content, we have such a large collection, we've been able to launch other programs drawing on the expertise of our membership. And these programs are intended to address questions and problems in the field that we couldn't easily do as independent actors. Right. So it's not enough for us just to say, here's 15 million books. The question is, once you've got 15 million books, what is it that you can do to address issues like collection management, like the evolving scholarly record, like our knowledge of copyright, and I'll talk about these programs as I go through. So a lot of you have joined recently, and we thank you for that. And I don't know in all cases all the stories behind your joining, but I just, as we talk to members and as we talk to new members, there are a few themes that kind of ring out. And among them being this first one, that a lot of people really want to be a part of building this collective future. That building a collection for the future and affecting how we will ensure its preservation and access in the future. And what you're doing there is you're leveraging existing collections. You're actually servicing your faculty and students as well by by becoming a member of HathiTrust. But I think also many of you individually, and I'll talk about opportunities for this in a second. Many of you individually find this as an interesting challenge to work with new colleagues on new problems and new challenges. And so, a quick picture of the membership here. We have, I believe, it's actually about 126 members right now, if I remember the count that Melissa gave us in the newsletter this week. We have mostly United States members, but there are 4 members from Canada on this list. There's one in Australia, one in Beirut, and one in Spain. Now, HathiTrust was founded way back in 2008, led by the University of Michigan, but officially founded by the members of the Big Ten Academic Alliance, which was then known as the CIC, as well as the University of California, the 10 libraries of that. And our initial vision for this was to build this cooperative infrastructure to manage a set of materials that were being generated from mass digitization programs, most notably Google, which began publicly in 2004, and the Internet Archive's Open Content Alliance, which began shortly thereafter. And mass digitization continues to this day. But the goal was, each of these libraries that were founding HathiTrust recognized, we're a library. Google is not a library. We need to take advantage of these collections for our users, for our students, and we can do that by drawing on cooperative and distributed expertise. So as I said, Michigan has been a real leader in the development and hosting of HathiTrust. And in fact, we are still housed at the University of Michigan. All of us online today are here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where it's actually feeling like spring. I don't know about where you are. It is also the site where we have the major part of our infrastructure for preservation and access. So we have our repository is based here. However, we also have mirror site at Indiana. We also have a research center that has a copy of the corpus and does some really interesting research on it. That's based both at Indiana and the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And then California Digital Library, because it has done so much work in metadata management across the UC system, has developed this tool called Zephyr, which we use and rely upon heavily for the management of our metadata. We have 15 million books, but we have many millions more bibliographic records contributed by members for these books, and Zephyr helps make sense of that set. A little bit about governance and decision making. As I said before, we're based at the University of Michigan. I'm actually, and everyone else on the line today will be an employee officially of the University of Michigan. But most importantly, I'm accountable to a board of governors that represents the interest of the membership. There are 6 appointed members from the founding institutions. There are 6 elected members who we elect at least 2 per year. Board of Governors also appoints a group called the Program Steering Committee. And I would think of it this way: if the board is working at the strategic and financial level and ensuring organizational longevity and health and proper governance, the Program Steering Committee is about helping to carry out those strategies, is about helping to figure out how we get underway with new programs, begins looking at issues like metadata quality and quality of the corpus, and starts to research how we can make improvements on those. PSC has a number of committees and working groups. I also have some working groups reporting to me, but mostly I'm responsible for ensuring that the organization operates effectively, that the administration of the organization works well, and that the operations are moving according to plan. So I mentioned before ways of getting involved in HathiTrust. We have a huge number of working groups and standing committees, and I always joke that's because we're a library. library organization, and of course we have to have committees. But more importantly, this is another way we draw on this distributed expertise and the way that members contribute back to the operation of HathiTrust. So I did a quick count this morning, and the number of different individuals who serve on these various committees numbers about 75 right now. So about 75 different people from all across the membership in these working groups and committees, and that's really quite something. And one of the things I'm really proud of is how committed and dedicated people are to participating in and working with HathiTrust. I have just a couple more comments before I turn this over to questions and then to Angelina. I always emphasize that as a membership organization, our work as HathiTrust has to align with the mission, the goals, and the purpose across the member partnership. So we've taken pains to put in some very hopefully transparent governance processes over the last several years. But I also feel that in addition to being transparent and involving the membership, we have to understand that our role as HathiTrust is within a larger ecosystem of digital infrastructure. We partner very heavily with the Digital Public Library of America, who provides search services across metadata. We really think of ourselves as complementary to DPLA, not in any way duplicating what they do or competing with what they do. And then the other thing that I will emphasize here is that we really emphasize being able to do things at large scale. And we do that not because we just like dealing with big stuff. It's really because we gain economies from working at large scale. We feel like we can have a bigger impact by working at large scale. And so there's a lot of things that might be interesting for us to do and problems that might be interesting to try to tackle, but which we can't really tackle effectively because we can't do it at the scale we might ordinarily for all of our other services. So I'm going to stop with that, take a few questions here if you have any at this point, and we will proceed from there.
For any of you who joined late, we are asking that you type any questions that you have in the chat window.
And Angelina, I'm going to stop sharing screen and switch over to your screen now, if that's okay. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. Is that fair?
Not any questions.
Okay.
Right
well, why don't I disappear for a few minutes, turn it over to Angelina, and I'll see you again in about 5 or 10 minutes.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm Angelina Zaitsev. I'm Collection Services Librarian for HathiTrust, and I'm going to ask you to excuse me because I'm going to be drinking tea throughout this since I have a bit of a sore throat. So I am now going to talk a little bit about the composition of the HathiTrust collection. And, I'm looking. Okay, here we go. So here are our current numbers for the repository. Very excitingly, we hit 15 million total items this weekend. So if you're interested in seeing what our 15 millionth title was, you can actually check out our newsletter where Mike wrote a little bit about that. So this number, 15 million, actually represents each unique digital object in our collection. If we're talking about how many titles or bibliographic records we have, that breaks down into 7.4 million monographs and about 400,000 serials. So these volumes have been contributed by over 40 different institutions and primarily come from collections around North America. So the language distribution of the HathiTrust collection has stayed pretty consistent over the years. English unsurprisingly makes up about 50% of the collection. And then the other languages in the top 10 include European languages such as German, French, and Spanish. And then we start to stray into the Asian continent with Russian, Chinese, and Japanese languages. So the top 10 languages make up about 87% of the collection, and then the remaining 13% of the collection is made up of a very long tail of about 451 other languages. As you've probably noticed by now, although HathiTrust has nearly 15 million volumes, only 5.8 million, or about 39% of those volumes, are available in full view. So this slide shows the breakdown of those full view volumes. Some are open because we have determined that they are in the public domain, either just to users located in the United States or to users located around the world. US federal government documents are also not protected by copyright, and so those are available in HathiTrust as well. The public domain determinations and the copyright determinations for federal documents are typically made based on the bibliographic records that we've received from our partners. And we have also done some manual copyright review of books through the CRMS program. In addition, we also work with authors and publishers to open titles, usually using a Creative Commons license, so that accounts for that tiny 0.27% sliver at the bottom of that bar graph. So this slide shows the distribution of materials in HathiTrust by publication date and whether they are open access or limited view. Unsurprisingly, most of the material published prior to 1900 is in the public domain. Then, as we start to move through the 20th century, increasing numbers of volumes are in copyright. Over 60% of the collection was published after 1950. As you would expect, most of those materials are still copyrighted. The volumes at the very top of the different bar graphs there that are in the public domain are typically US federal government documents or books where we have received permission from rights holders to make those available. And then we kind of like to throw this slide in here as an example of the wide variety of users and usage of our collection. We typically see a lot of use by the general public as well as by researchers. Number 3 on this list, Quicksand by Nella Larson, has been in our top 10 most accessed titles since basically 2012, so since the beginning almost. And we suspect that this book is being referenced in AP English classes, which accounts for its high usage. So if you're interested in learning more about our usage stats, and I would recommend checking out this blog post that was just published a couple weeks ago that describes the HathiTrust growth and usage in 2016. So are there any questions at this time? Melissa, is there anything?
I am not seeing any questions at this time, Angelina.
Great. Well, I will keep going with the next section, but if you have any questions about what I just covered, feel free to type it into the chat window and we can get to it at the end. Okay, so going on to the next section, I'd like to focus on how our members can participate in HathiTrust. Our core service that we offer our members is preservation of their digital content. We are committed to preserving and providing access to our collections over the long term, and to that end, we have undertaken a number of strategies in order to ensure that we are around for a long time. We are a TRAC certified digital repository, and we are also replicating data for DPN. But we don't preserve materials for their own sake. Preservation has to be linked to access. This is one of our core principles. So our most visible activities and services support discovery, access, and use. Users are able to discover materials through our own catalog and full text search services. And in addition, many libraries, both members and non-members, have added our records to their catalog. Our records are also included in major library discovery services such as Lemon, WorldCat, and DPLA. So once a user finds relevant content, there are many factors that go into our access policies. So anybody anywhere is able to go to our website and read public domain and open access works through our interface. In addition, all users are able to search across the full text of all of our books. Then we offer a number of services to support text and data mining as well, many through the HathiTrust Research Center. And Mike will talk a little bit more about the HTRC in a bit. And independent of the services that we offer through HTRC, scholars are also able to request and download data sets for their own usage and analysis. In addition to the access services that everybody's able to take advantage of, members get a few other options. About 90% of the HathiTrust collection has full download restrictions on it, which were required by either the contributing institution or by the digitizing vendor. For those materials, only members are able to download the full PDFs of those public domain and open access books. Non-members can only download one page at a time. We also offer our members access to copyrighted content for the specific use of users with print disabilities. This is primarily a mediated access service at this time, which means that a staff member at our member library has to register with us in advance, and then that staff member goes into our collection, downloads the full PDF of the copyrighted work, and distributes it to their print disabled user. Members can also receive access to copyrighted materials through the preservation replacement service under certain conditions. Another way to participate in HathiTrust is to deposit your scanned content into our collection. We have different processes in place for content depending on whether it was digitized by Google, Internet Archive, or was scanned locally or through another vendor. For all three of these types of content, there are three things that need to happen before we can successfully ingest the content. So there is some documentation that must be submitted, and then there are separate processes for submission of bibliographic metadata and of digital content. We have found that locally digitized content is some of the most complex to ingest, often because content has been prepared over the years to varying specifications that may not meet our requirements. We have continued to work to improve this service, and if you're interested in depositing your locally digitized materials, I would recommend checking out this page listed here to see the tools that we continue to develop. One of the core requirements of membership in HathiTrust is submitting updated print holdings data annually. The print holdings data is a crucial crucial data type that underlies our services and operations in HathiTrust. Member fees, for example, are based on local print holdings and the overlap with the HathiTrust collection. Some of our services are also based on the print holdings data, such as lawful access to in-copyright materials, and we also use this print holdings data to do analysis across member libraries and against the HathiTrust collection in order to drive decision-making about shared print and selection of materials for digitization. Members are able to participate in the governance of HathiTrust in a few different ways. So serving on working groups and task forces has the most impact on policies, strategies, and operations of HathiTrust. Mike has mentioned some of those existing working groups that you can participate in. The annual member meeting is an opportunity for partners to engage in conversation with the Board of Governors as well as other members. So during this event updates are provided on the current status of HathiTrust and initiatives, and members are also able to express concerns and provide input into the strategy of HathiTrust. We just recently set the date for the 2017 member meeting, so we hope to see you in Chicago on November 2nd. And then voting is another key member activity. At the end of each year, members are asked to vote to approve the budget for the subsequent year, and the Board of Governors are elected by membership. So every year, voting happens to elect new governors. The call for new governors will go out during the summer this year, and voting will happen in the fall. So just to summarize what was discussed in this section and previous section, members have multiple opportunities to engage in HathiTrust. Some activities are required, but most of these activities are voluntary, and it really depends on your own willingness and enthusiasm. So I'd like to check and see if there are any questions at this time while I stop sharing my screen.
We do have a question, Angelina, and I just want to remind everyone that we are, make sure that you keep your video and your sound turned off. I can mute participants myself from here, so if you notice that you've been muted, please don't unmute yourself because we can hear you fidgeting on our end. So University of Oregon has a question. They may hold copyright to content in HathiTrust and are interested in where they can find out more information on how to expand access to that content.
Oh, so these are materials that University of Oregon has published, or perhaps your authors, your faculty members have written and published. If that is the case, we do have a permissions agreement on our website that rights holders can fill out, and you can either select a Creative Commons license, which is obviously preferred, but if you don't want to assign Creative Commons license, we can just open it as open access. And also, I want to mention that if you have a number of publications, which can be the case with universities that have been around for a long period of time, there may be multiple student directories or course catalogs or yearbooks or something like that. We can help you to identify all of the publications that may be affiliated with your institution by running reports. And then you would go through that report and determine which things you actually own the copyright to, and then fill out that permissions agreement.
Okay, any more questions? Looks like that was the only question for right now.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay, I'm picking it back up here. This is Mike again, and I think that last question was really important. What we found is you just never know where stuff from some place happens to be in another library and is scanned and is added to HathiTrust. And so please do take that into consideration if there's material in there that your university may hold the copyright to. As Angelina said, there's a permissions form, but I'm going to give you some more information at the end of this webcast about how to get in touch with us and how to follow up on a few issues. But right now, what I want to do is talk about the cooperative initiatives that we have underway. And I referred to some of these earlier this morning. One of the things that I think is really fantastic is that we're able to undertake these kinds of cooperative and kind of enabling initiatives to tackle significant problems in the library community that we've not been able to address previously, at least not easily on our own. So I'm going to talk about 4 of these. I'll talk about copyright review. I'll talk about a program we have to expand access to federal government documents. I'll talk about our shared print program, and then I'll wrap up with a conversation about our computational research services. So with copyright review, the problem that we really were trying to address was that we can't really easily know the copyright status of some works that are in the collection. Date of publication and place of publication are only starting points in many cases to understanding the copyright status of a work. In the United States, there was a period of time where certain formalities had to be followed and material had to be renewed for copyright. And if those were not done, then the material's in the public domain. In other countries other than the United States, they tend to rely on a life date to determine copyright status. So in the United Kingdom, it's 70 years after the date the death of the author. Canada and Australia, 50 years. So we took this program pretty seriously and started it in 2008 at the University of Michigan with funding from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And we did 2 major projects under funding from IMLS. And throughout this, we had about 70 different individuals at different institutions working through a system we called CRMS, and they were reviewing the works, investigating the copyright status, conducting the research necessary, recording what they found, and then we had a system of evaluating that. And we would then export the rights status. And so as a result, over 600,000 works have been reviewed, and a little over 50% of those have been found to be out of copyright in the public domain. We have not undertaken non-English language works at this point because the language skills needed are harder to come by But we're certainly interested in doing that at some future point. Right now, we've just recently, in fact, this week, started a new program of U.S. publications. Since we finished the first round of that, we added another 100,000 or so publications that were that qualified for review, and so we're starting that, and I'm hoping we'll have really positive results with that as well. With federal documents, there's a couple of different problems, many actually. The biggest one is the best way to describe it is that federal documents are voluminous. They're almost everywhere in academic research libraries in the United States, but they're not always easily discovered. They're not well cataloged. Often they're cataloged according to different standards. Sometimes they're not cataloged at all. And what we know about them is actually very little, right? We don't know how many federal documents actually exist. There isn't a lot of that depends on how you define it, but there isn't even the catalog of government publications published by the government printing office does not really, and they would admit, does not really represent the full corpus of U.S. federal documents. So what we have done here is we've tried to tackle all of these problems at once, which might be a crazy thing to do. But the goal is that we can make these materials more accessible, more easily discovered, and help libraries better manage their physical collections if we were able to digitize more of these materials. So a couple of major aspects of this project. One was to develop a registry of documents to answer this question of what are the federal documents in existence. We have done a lot of work on that. We're not confident that we're done, but we have been able to winnow down to about 5 million records right now. We know there's still duplication within that. But what we're doing next is focusing on gap analysis in our collection, so comparing our collection with the registry, and then also beginning to compare those gaps with the holdings of our member libraries and identifying collections that might be good candidates for digitization and add to HathiTrust. So that's a really exciting program, one that has a lot of moving parts, and in some ways is a little bit amorphous, but the goal is pretty clear: expand access. Shared print is also a kind of a cluster of problems we were trying to solve here. One is that there's quite a bit of duplication of physical collections in the United States, and that's kind of natural. You saw the chart a little while ago that showed how many more materials were published or were added to HathiTrust after the Second World War. There was many more books published after the Second World War. Library collections budgets grew significantly after the war, and more books were bought and distributed around the country. And a lot of those books now are not as frequently used. Not to say they're unimportant, but they just might not be as active as others. And libraries have been seeking ways of minimizing the footprint of these collections in their main library spaces on campus. You are probably familiar with this around journals. Really, since JSTOR got started in the mid-90s, the ability to develop a collaborative or collective preservation archive of journals, those in JSTOR, has been a major project. And many libraries have been withdrawing or working with other libraries to create cooperative networks to manage journals in a single location. Monographs have been less easily tackled. They don't offer as much bang for the buck on the shelving, but they, in many ways, are easier. They're somewhat easier to do than journals in other ways too. So the goal of this program is to establish a distributed archive of physical books that mirrors the HathiTrust monographs collection. And we're going to focus first on monographs because there's currently a lot of activity in monographs and not a lot of coordinated action. So this archive is being developed right now. We have about 55 partners who have volunteered to be part of the first phase and evaluate their collections and their overlap with HathiTrust to determine what, if any of those, they might be able to commit to retaining over the course of a couple of decades, 25 years. Two important more notes here. One is, by doing this, what we're really trying to do is create a situation where we know more about our collective collections. In fact, what we know today, we don't really know what libraries are committing to retain what monographs over what period of time. Some estimates that we've done is that maybe there are 19 million individual commitments to retain monographs in the collections across North America, but only a couple million of those are discoverable in WorldCat. So part of this is to kind of initiate the focus on getting these commitments made and creating the infrastructure that allows them to be disclosed. And then the other is to catalyze this kind of national collective action around these issues and begin to create something like a national level cooperative. But most importantly here, I want to emphasize this, we're not trying to replicate or supersede existing shared print programs. In fact, what we're really trying to do is build off of those and draw upon the work that's already been done and build a network of these programs together. So that's the shared print monograph program, and I'm happy to take questions about that. Computational research, I would say this is probably not a problem we saw that we needed to tackle, although it presents some challenges. Really, the issue was an opportunity. By digitizing as many millions of books as we had, we actually saw the opportunity to spark new kinds of research, new kinds of analysis on the collection. Back in the early part of this century, in the literary theory, a phrase called distant reading started to emerge to refer to text and data mining on literature. And so to accomplish this, we organized a study and released an RFP for a research center. And Indiana University and the University of Illinois responded to that with a joint proposal to host the research center. And they both have different expertise, different strengths. Indiana is very strong on cyber infrastructure. Illinois is very strong on digital humanities and some of the informatics pieces of this. The research center does both some research on its own, or seeks funding to do some research that helps expand our understanding and infrastructure for supporting this service. But really, the research center is a service. It's a service that is available to researchers who want to come in and take advantage of tools that other researchers have developed to do some analysis. The analytics portal provides you with a way to do that, as well as work on developing your own subsets. There's a tool that's been in development called the data capsule that gives you a kind of a virtual machine environment where you can go in with a subset and run your own analyses against that collection. The big challenge here is this term non-consumptive. Non-consumptive for us means essentially not reading, right? A human is not reading the text. And we rely really heavily on copyright law and fair use in particular to support the activities that we do in HathiTrust. And so it is a fair use to enable text mining on the full collection of HathiTrust. But taking advantage of that and making the fair use requires a certain amount of diligence and security and carefulness to ensure that we're not inadvertently releasing parts of the collection that shouldn't be released. And so that's the real technical and policy challenges that the Research Center have been focusing on. And if you looked at our newsletter this week, you saw that they just promoted or just announced a new policy to help define some of this work. Last thing I want to say here is that this Advanced Collaborative Support Program is something we've done every year for the last 2 years. I think we have a new call coming out in about, sometime in March. I don't know the exact date. And the idea here is that researchers or research teams can submit a proposal to the Research Center that would pitch a project that would need to use the HathiTrust corpus. And then those that are awarded have some guaranteed support time from staff at the Research Center. I don't know, I cannot remember the exact amount. I want to say it's about 40 hours of staff time over a period of months to do the initial piloting of research that would eventually maybe be a larger project. Now, to give you some examples of what this research is, I think to say text and data mining is kind of abstract. Non-consumptive research is even more abstract. So here's a couple of examples of previous advanced collaborative support projects. On the left is a project from an economist, Michelle Alexopoulos at the University of Toronto, who has been, she's really an economic historian, and what she has been studying for years is how technologies emerge and evolve and then diffuse through other from their original domain into other areas. The example here shows the steam engine and how that begins to be connected to other concepts and shows up in other literatures. Michelle initially started doing this work on using MARC records and analyzing subject headings in MARC records to track some of this. But through the Research Center services, she's able to do this on a larger collection and do it on the content. Being able to get a much richer data set from that. Matthew Wilkins at the University of Notre Dame has a project that is called Literary Geography at Scale. It's really about extracting from the full corpus, or at least in this case a subset, but eventually the full corpus, an index of place names, geographic names, rather than individual names. And the challenges you face here are being able to disambiguate Charlotte, North Carolina, Charlottesville, Virginia, and Queen Charlotte. Or your grandmother Charlotte or Charlotte Bronte, and the initial pilot ran across just 10,000 volumes. You can see here the results on a map of where these place names would be referred to. The goal is next to process the entire corpus, and this project is somewhat related to another effort that the Research Center has to release something called the extracted features of the entire collection, which is a very large data set with page-level metadata about things like how many words on the page, how many lines, what are the parts of speech, what languages appear on these pages. And that data is actually really useful to folks like Michelle and Matthew who are working on subsets and need to determine if their data set is in any way representative of what they find in the whole collection. So I will stop there. I'm happy to take questions now. These are all really exciting and intriguing projects, and I'm happy to take some questions about them at this point.
We do have a couple of questions, Mike.
Okay.
Another one from University of Oregon. Will HathiTrust provide help to institutions who haven't navigated asking for copyright permission or establishing whether a work is in copyright in the past?
Yeah, I would say that's something we can help you with. I think Angelina has had in the past enough experience working with other universities to be able to help pin down some of the questions that might need to be asked there. So that I would say contact us, and then we can try to walk through that process. Angelina, do you want to add to that?
I guess the main thing
I just committed you to doing a lot of work, didn't I?
A little bit. I think the cases where it's been pretty easy and clear to figure out where the university owns the copyright for materials is publications that have been copyrighted by the trustees of the university, for example, or where the university is simply listed as the copyright holder. Like those kinds of materials it's pretty easy and clear. When we start to get into things that are published by a specific department or a press on campus or a specific school, that's where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, and you may want to consult with your own legal counsel on campus to verify how to proceed there. But we can, yeah.
I think that's really an important point, that every campus has its own culture and its own approach and understanding of who is the steward of copyrighted materials within a university. And working within that structure is really important for you to be able to be successful in this. So.
Yeah.
There was a second half of that question, Melissa, I think that I have forgotten now. Or did I get it all?
I think that's about all of it. It was
Okay.
Help institutions who haven't navigated asking for copyright permission or establishing whether a work is in copyright in the past.
Ah, right. Okay.
So I think that kind of.
Okay.
I have another question from Dickinson College. Have the lawsuits been settled? Is HathiTrust still being challenged by publishers?
The good news is we are not in the court. We have won our cases, as a matter of fact. We were sued, for those of you who don't know this or have forgotten, when Google started scanning way back in 2004, it was really controversial And I can go back through historical files and find letters from publishers to the University of Michigan complaining about their participation in this. But the publishers and the Authors Guild sued Google. They attempted to settle that in a very wide-ranging settlement that eventually fell apart. And at that point, Google and the publishers settled, but the Authors Guild continued on its lawsuit against Google and also sued HathiTrust at that time, which was an interesting choice. The over the next 3 years in the HathiTrust case, the courts found in our favor pretty much on summary judgment. The first ruling came about a year after the lawsuit was filed. Looking at the merits of the arguments of the Authors Guild, found entirely in our favor. That was appealed. The appeals court ruled in our favor. There was a couple of issues not fully argued and not fully litigated in that case, but the suits are over, and we're not being challenged by publishers or authors. But that doesn't mean that we don't care, right? It's I think we know, and one of the reasons we won that case is because we were careful. We did understand the law. We did know the law was on our side and what we were doing was lawful, and being able to demonstrate that and demonstrate the care we take with protecting copyright information is a large part of both our reputation and about our success in those cases. So,
I don't see any other questions at this time.
Okay. Then if not, I believe it's time for me to turn it over to Sandra for the final few minutes of our talk today.
Mike, could you unshare your screen so I could share mine? Great, thanks.
Sorry about that. I forgot I was not sharing that you were at this point.
No problem. And just pulling up my screen here. Thanks, Mike. I'm Sandra McIntyre, the Director of Services and Operations. I'm going to talk to you about our priorities coming up for operations as we continue to increase our services for members. We've got a lot of focuses in addition to the ones that Mike has described about our programs so that we can improve our operations. And coming up this year, we have 3 focuses. We're optimizing our core services, our core operations, getting ready for accelerated growth, making sure we can accommodate the large scale and continuing growth in that scale that Mike mentioned earlier. We're also looking to provide additional value as we grow the collection and expand access to everyone that we can in response to member needs. And finally, we're wanting to assess what's next for our collaborative work, look out to the future. As we optimize for accelerated growth, we have a number of different tasks to get ourselves in shape for making sure that we can continue to move forward at scale. We're improving our communication across all the HathiTrust sites, looking how we can leverage tools and resources across those different distributed sites in our network to take full advantage, bring down the cost of operations, take full advantage of great ideas coming from staff at the different sites. We're updating operational policies and paying some attention to our service principles and smoothing workflows for all of our operations processes. In addition, we want to make sure that we're improving our tracking and showing a lot of transparency to our members about how we operate, how we develop, how we make decisions about what we're going to develop next. All of this requires additional staffing growth, so we're doing some plans to take on several additional positions in 2017. And as always, we have ongoing improvements to our code, our interface, and all of our systems. We continue, as we are expanding our capacity, to also make sure that we're expanding access in response to all of our member needs. In 2015, there was a collections priority survey run by the Collections Committee of HathiTrust, and they identified some important goals, and we're making sure to pay attention to those in our work this year. Those include a continued attention to serving our users with print disabilities. We're setting up a relationship with the National Federation of the Blind and looking forward to that engagement very much. We're exploring more text formats, looking primarily currently at PDF and EPUB formats, pursuing improvements in content quality and metadata quality, and figuring out how to show the existence of quality indicators to our users, and improving our analysis tools so we know what's in our collection, where our gaps are, how we can improve that going forward. In addition to the goals identified by the Collections Committee, we have other program priorities that we're paying attention to. We're identifying digital collection development priorities. Where do we want to go with growing the corpus? We're improving contributions workflow, creating additional tools to help you as you contribute your materials to HathiTrust, continuing and refreshing our copyright review program, and looking to improve our preservation replacement service that is made available under the provisions of Section 108C of the Copyright Code. And then finally, we're assessing what's next. Mike and the Board of Governors are working together to chart the future, looking at a strategic planning process this summer and wanting to make sure to engage the membership in setting directions for the next 3 to 5 years. Where will we be heading? What's our next key services direction that we want to deliver to our members and all of our users? And in parallel with that, we're developing a services roadmap and extending that steadily. We've been working to a 4-month improvement cycle. We're now extending that to a year at a time with our operations plan and wanting soon to push that out to 18 months and even 3 years going forward. As part of all of this, as we look to 2017 and beyond, we want to engage all of you as much as possible. So I extend an invitation to you to be in touch with us, whether you want to ask a question about what we presented today or anything else that's related to HathiTrust activities, or just want to talk to us about your suggestions, give us your input. We would welcome hearing from you. Our main address to reach us is feedback@issues.hathitrust.org. If you send a message to that address, it'll be logged in our user support working group system, and the working group will make sure that your message is directed to the staff member or the governance member who can best answer it and work with you on your question or suggestion. We hope you'll be in touch with us. Mike, Angelina, and I all would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your suggestions, your ideas. It's what you do that's really at the heart of what HathiTrust can do, and we want to hear from you and understand what you need. So I'll stop here for any questions on this section, or for that matter, any question on earlier sections that may have occurred to you in the meantime.
I do have a couple of questions from Dickinson College. Early in the presentation, you mentioned HathiTrust use statistics. How do you measure use?
Angelina, do you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So in HathiTrust, we primarily use Google Analytics to get our usage statistics. We've looked into using CounterStats in the past, but have found that it doesn't work with the way our services work. So as I mentioned, we are happy to set up librarians and staff from our partner libraries with access to our Google Analytics profiles.
All right, next question. How can we receive the newsletter? I can answer that one. What I'll do is, I thought of this during the presentation today. I'll send you all a link to the newsletter that was sent out yesterday. When you go to the link, there is a spot where you can subscribe if you want to receive the newsletter every month. You can also go to our website, HathiTrust.org/ I think it's updates, but there is in the drop down of about, you can find all of our past newsletters and a link to our most current newsletter there as well. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay. Well, why don't we start wrapping up here then?
There we go.
All right. Yeah. So this is the slide I wanted to leave you with. First thing I want to say is thank you for spending the last 55 minutes with us. Hope that you have found this to be useful and interesting, and that you've learned some things. I will encourage you again to reach out to us and get in touch with us through the feedback@issues.hathitrust.org email address so that we can track you and respond to you. A few more links here just to kind of give you some additional information. Melissa just mentioned how to subscribe to the newsletter. Also, you might find these URLs a little bit more also interesting, not more interesting, but also interesting. I'll call out particularly the resources and guides link, because there we have linked a number of different LibGuides or other subject guides that have been developed by libraries members, and we try to collect those and link those there. We do occasionally publish material on our blogs. Perspectives from HathiTrust has been the most active blog recently, and we'll cover anything from our shared print program and what's going on with that to possibly some copyright policy issue that's happening in the country. And then lastly, social media. We have a Twitter account at HathiTrust. We also have a Facebook page. If you're active on those two social media platforms, please do take a look at those. So I want to see if we have any last questions here before we head off to lunchtime on the East Coast.
I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay. Well, I will say again, thank you very much. Hope you all have a good afternoon, and please do be in touch.
All right, and I'll be sending this recording when it's ready, as well as the slides from today's presentation.
Great. I'll hang online for a minute just in case something else comes up here. Mm-hmm.